Okay, so we are continuing on with our Unit 7 here, talking about the other movements of the 20th century. So we've started the gay liberation movement. I talked about that in the last video, so that's what we're going to wrap up in this one. So after Stonewall and those early years of the 1960s, we really start to see the 70s see when a lot more protests happening and a lot more consciousness raising. After the movement began to gain traction, not just on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, lots of people who were gay and living in parts of the United States where there wasn't really much of a movement were drawn to that because those cities seemed like the only places where they could go and be sort of like openly themselves. San Francisco was definitely the biggest one out of all of those. It's known as the gay migration. All through the 1970s, tons of gay people start moving to these cities because that's where the movement is. Specifically, Castro Street in San Francisco was known for sort of like the Greenwich Village of New York. So Harvey Milk in San Francisco became the first openly gay and pro-gay rights politician ever. He was elected the city supervisor, and he used that power to pass gay rights ordinance in the city, which attracted even more people because they felt like that was a city that was going to protect them and look out for them. Unfortunately, in 1978, Harvey Milk was assassinated by a co-worker named Dan White, who actually also killed the mayor of San Francisco in all of that. When he was arrested for the murder of them, his defense was that he was crazed from a sugar high because he had eaten a lot of Twinkies. That was his actual defense. It became very famous, known as the Twinkie Defense. Fortunately, he was found guilty, but he was only given 5 years in prison, and he died in prison of suicide. But right after Harvey Milk's assassination and the acceptance of this ridiculous defense, this triggered riots, not only in San Francisco but across the country. These were known as the White Night riots, and once the riots calmed down, this pushed for a lot of people to host the first National Gay Rights March. It was in 1979, and they hosted over 100,000 people. And we know that we see gay rights marches now every year during Pride. So over the next few years, we start to see more and more states continue to decriminalize homosexuality on a state-by-state basis. 1962, remember, was the first state to do so, and that was Illinois, and more states will fall in line. But of course, those more traditional states and more rural states are going to be dragging their feet on that. I'm talking about, of course, the South, but the states out west, states like Wyoming and Idaho, Nebraska, Kansas, those states are also really going to drag their feet, and we're not going to see full decriminalization of homosexuality until 2003, and it was the Supreme Court case Lawrence v. Texas. In Lawrence v. Texas, the Supreme Court officially decriminalized being gay in the United States, which is definitely a positive, but very sad that it took all the way until 2003. Now, moving out of the gay liberation movement years and into the 1980s, the major issue that the gay community is dealing with is not, unfortunately, what they should be trying to deal with is movements and protests trying to get everything decriminalized and work towards equal treatment. But instead, what they were hit with was a massive epidemic. Starting in June of 1981, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, started noticing abnormal illnesses in 5 gay men in Los Angeles, and what they noticed was that they were dying of things that they really shouldn't have been dying from. They were becoming very sick from illnesses that should not have been, quite so deadly. And this was spreading very fast. They started calling it gay cancer. after doing research, they realized it wasn't a cancer at all and that it was an immune deficiency. You know, people who have AIDS or HIV don't die of AIDS or HIV. They die of other illnesses that their body couldn't fight off because they don't have a proper immune system. They have an immune deficiency. So in June of 1982, they officially gave it its first name, and it was called GRID, G-R-I-D, and GRID stood for Gay-Related Immune Deficiency. They had no idea how it spread, but what they knew was that it was most prevalent among gay men, which is why it was called the Gay-Related Immune Deficiency. Does it actually have anything to do with being gay? Absolutely not, right? Straight people can get AIDS and HIV just as easily as gay people can get it, and there are plenty of other ways to be exposed that don't involve, you know, the transmission of fluids or anything like that. So whether it be, you know, like drugs or, you know, needles, there are plenty of other ways that it could be contracted, and I'm sure plenty of other ways people were contracting it at the time. But because there was so little information and knowledge calling it gay-related immune deficiency, it creates this mass paranoia and increased homophobia. Now people feel like all gay people are ill. I don't want to be around them because I don't want to catch this. And it was really only called GRID for a short time. That by August of 1982, they had already renamed it AIDS, which stood for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, because they realized you didn't have to be gay to get this. You could get it also other sorts of ways. But plenty of other people were still using that old terminology. And even when you didn't use it, people still had that perspective. We knew so little about it. And the government, especially the president, Reagan at the time, they were really dragging their feet on trying to put any type of money or funding into looking for a cure or treatment. A lot of people didn't care that this was primarily affecting gay people in the United States because those people were considered the dirt of society anyway, and they were like, whatever, let AIDS clean it up. It didn't start to become more of a national conversation until the death of a very famous actor named Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson contracted AIDS and died, and it really brought a face that a lot of people, you know, most people in the United States, unless you lived in a city and were around a really diverse group of people, they didn't know anyone who was gay, or at least they thought they didn't know anyone who was gay, and they probably didn't know anyone with AIDS. Ultimately, more gay men are going to die during these years of AIDS than all the people that died during Vietnam. So it really was a national health crisis, and no one is really trying, even once there starts to become more awareness, no one on a major government level is trying to put a lot of resources into helping this community. So they had to ultimately help themselves, and we'll see several organizations formed. One was called the Gay Men's Health Crisis, was formed in New York City to help the gay community fight AIDS. Like I said, more gay men in just New York are going to die than in all of Vietnam. So New York was definitely an area that was heavily affected. And one of the other groups to come out of New York was called ACT UP, and their slogan was ACT UP Fight AIDS. And they would do these really intense and elaborate protests. They like broke into research facilities, and they would stage these like really controversial protests trying to get media attention so that they could work and save their own lives. Luckily, over time, we will see more awareness about HIV and AIDS, and we will begin to see more research and funding put into this. So now, today, if you contract AIDS or HIV, you're almost guaranteed to still live a full life. And there's even been so much progress in terms of medicine that a woman with AIDS or HIV can even give birth to a child, and the child not necessarily also have HIV or AIDS, which is pretty incredible considering where we were coming from, where it was, massive amounts of positive cases and deaths all the time, and a community having to defend itself with no real help. Unfortunately, when we get to the 1990s, a lot of this progress that we've seen the community gain they're going to lose it under the Clinton administration. There was this big reemergence of tradition and moving back to old values, and so we'll see Bill Clinton pass two bills that are really going to hurt the community. The first is Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or DAT, which he signed in 1996. And what that did is it essentially banned anyone who was gay from serving in the military. It was two parts. The don't ask part, meaning the federal government's not going to look into your sexual orientation. We're not going to ask. We're not allowed to ask. And then the don't tell part is you are not allowed to tell. If you tell, then you are going to be dishonorably discharged. And this was really difficult for a lot of people, having to make a choice of if you want to serve your country, or you want to join the military, whether it's because you're looking for, a career in there, or you're looking for a way to help pay for college or something like that. A lot of people use those options. But if you're being told, we'll take you, but you have to lie about who you are as a person, like if your loved one writes you a letter or calls you, or you have exciting news from home, you can't share that with your fellow soldiers. So it was a really difficult situation, and we know that there will be tens of thousands of people to get discharged, over the next several years because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it's probably much higher than what's reported, because there are plenty of cases of people who were being discharged because they were gay, but they would write, out of the kindness of their hearts, a lot of commanding officers would put something different on the papers as to why they were being discharged, because with a dishonorable discharge, it's almost impossible for any veteran to get any type of job. That's really the worst thing you could ever have on your record. The second thing that Bill Clinton's going to sign into law is the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, D-O-M-A, which, made a federal statement that marriage was between one man and one woman. So that's going to be one of the biggest things that the community is going to be facing and trying to overturn as they move forward. Now, in the late 90s, we were starting to see, more conversations about violence against gay people, or gay bashing. And at the time, attacking someone because they were gay was not seen as a hate crime. Committing a hate crime is like violence against a person because of their race or gender or religion. But at the time, you could attack someone for being gay and face no harsher punishment than if you had just, gotten into a bar fight with them. But a case in 1998 will change that. And it was the case of this young man right here named Matthew Shepard. He was 21 years old, a college student at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. And one night he left Wyoming. It was close to the border where he lived, and he went to a bar, a gay bar, well, a bar in general, but it was a bar where plenty of other guys it wasn't a gay bar. It was a bar where other guys from Wyoming would go to pick up dudes, because it was sort of like the next closest bar to where they lived. And in Wyoming, it was so rural, really, where they were. You wouldn't want to go to a bar in your own town, because someone could see you with a man, and then that would ruin your entire life. So they would go to another town and go to a bar there. And so they go to another town, they go to this bar, and he meets two men, Russell Henderson and Aaron McKinney. They saw Matthew Shepard. They figured he was gay. They lured him into their car, by pretending that they were being friendly with him, and they took him out to a remote area, beat him, robbed him, tortured him, left him tied to a fence, naked in freezing temperatures. His entire face was red, covered in blood, except for 2 tear tracks under his eyes where it had washed the blood off. He was found not until the next morning, where he was immediately rushed to a hospital and in a coma for 18 where he had been outside for 18 hours. He was in a coma in the hospital for 6 days. While he was in the hospital, they found out that he was HIV positive. He unfortunately died on October the 12th of 1998. These two men were tracked down and arrested, and their defense was basically going to be the gay panic defense, that they hadn't been around a gay person before, and they felt that their lives were in danger, or that they were going to be raped. So they panicked and attacked him. Luckily, the judge saw through that and threw that defense out, so they weren't allowed to present that in court. And ultimately, they both were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Matthew Shepard's death was a huge rallying point for the movement moving forward and trying to get sexual orientation added to the hate crimes list, and it finally was in 2009. Obama signed into law the Matthew Shepard Act, which added sexual orientation to that hate crimes list. And in October of 2018, his ashes were buried in the Washington National Cathedral. And he's the first civilian to be buried there since Helen Keller, actually. So that's pretty incredible for Matthew Shepard to be there. But getting into the 21st century, we're going to see a lot of things, pushing the movement forward. A big campaign starting off the 20th century was called It Gets Better, funded and promoted by a man named Dan Savage, who was using the campaign to combat the rising suicide rates of gay kids and teens. And these are conversations we're first starting to have about the mental illness and the trauma and toll that being in a home that doesn't accept you, or being in a society that doesn't accept you, can have not only on adults but on gay kids and teenagers. So luckily, though, because of programs like this, we will see things start to get better. It's definitely still a work in progress, but we are in better shape than we were, 20 or even 10 years ago. But when Obama became president in 2009, he became the first president to openly support LGBT progress and equality, and he will sign several and take several actions that support them. Matthew Shepard Act being one that we already mentioned. Another is he will repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So now gay people can openly serve in the military. And then he also was president when the Supreme Court heard the case Obergefell v. Hodges in 2011 and supported their decision in the case, which was to finally legalize same-sex marriage in, like I said, 2011, Obergefell v. Hodges. So we've never seen a president be so supportive of the LGBT community as Obama was. And we see that in the amount of progress that comes in his 8 years as president.